They sold my land behind my back until the truth hit them hard. I didn't cry when I found out. That's the part people don't understand, and maybe they never will. People expect tears when something precious is taken from you. They expect your voice to shake, your knees to buckle, your heart to spill out through your eyes. But when the truth finally reached me, I didn't give it that satisfaction. I stood still, almost calm, as if my body decided to protect my heart by freezing everything else. When my own family sold my land behind my back, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why, even though that word echoed inside my chest like a drum that wouldn't stop beating. I just stood there, holding a piece of paper that wasn't meant for my eyes, the edges already bent as if it had been passed around too many hands before it ever reached mine. And I smiled. A soft, polite smile. The kind you give when you're trying to convince the world, and yourself, that nothing inside you has just cracked open. The land had been mine for over 40 years. 40 years is a long time to belong to something, or maybe it's a long time for something to belong to you. I can't tell the difference anymore. 40 years of waking up with the sun and knowing exactly where I was. 40 years of stepping outside barefoot, feeling the ground under me, solid and familiar. 40 years of dust on my shoes, dust I never bothered to brush off because it meant I had been outside, working, living, staying connected to something real. 40 years of believing that what I built with my own hands would one day protect me, the way I had protected everyone else. That land wasn't just soil and fences. It was memory layered on top of memory. It was my life stretched out under the sky. Every corner held a story, even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones. And yet the truth didn't come to me with drama. There was no shouting, no family meeting, no uncomfortable confession over dinner. It came quietly, almost politely. No warning, no respect. Just a stranger's voice on the phone, steady and businesslike, saying, "Ma'am, we'll be starting construction next month." At first, I thought he had the wrong number. That happens sometimes. People dial wrong numbers all the time. I almost laughed, but something in his tone stopped me. He sounded too certain, too prepared, like someone who had already said these words many times before. I remember the way my hands started to shake as I asked him what construction he was talking about. My voice sounded far away, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I was careful with my words, polite the way I had been taught to be, even though my heart was beginning to pound harder with every second. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for me to feel it. Then he gave me an address. My address. He said it clearly, confidently, as if reading it from a file. As if it were just another location on a long list of places that no longer belonged to the people who loved them. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not all at once, but slowly, like a door closing in another room. I felt it in my chest first, a tightness that made it hard to breathe without thinking about it. That's when I knew something had gone terribly wrong. I thanked him. I don't know why I thanked him. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was shock. Maybe part of me still believed that if I stayed polite enough, the world would suddenly correct itself. I hung up the phone, my fingers stiff as if they no longer remembered how to move, and I sat down on the edge of my bed. The mattress dipped under my weight, familiar and comforting, and for a second I just stared at the wall across from me. Then I whispered to myself, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. They didn't even tell me. The words felt strange in my mouth, like they didn't belong there. I said them again in my head, slower this time, letting each part settle. They didn't even tell me. Not a warning, not a conversation, not a moment of honesty, just silence, just signatures, just decisions made somewhere else without my name spoken out loud. The house around me was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you notice it. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of every small sound, the ticking of a clock, the hum of electricity in the walls, your own breathing. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat and wonder how something so loud inside you can stay completely invisible to everyone else. I looked around the room, and suddenly everything felt fragile. The dresser my husband had fixed when one of the drawers wouldn't close. The chair by the window where I used to sit and watch the evening settle in. The framed photos on the wall, moments frozen in time, smiling faces that had no idea what was coming. It all felt like it was slipping away, not because it was being taken by strangers, but because it had already been given away by people I trusted. I had raised my children on that land. I could still see them running across it, their laughter carrying through the air, their shoes muddy and their hands sticky from whatever fruit they had picked without asking. I could still hear their voices calling for me, needing me, trusting me to always be there. I taught them how to walk there, how to ride their bikes, how to stand back up when they fell and scraped their knees. I had buried memories there too, the heavy ones I never spoke about much. I had cried there when no one was watching. I had prayed there when I didn't know what else to do. I had stood under the open sky and asked for strength more times than I could count. That land had seen me at my weakest and never turned away from me. I had planted trees with my late husband, our hands dirty and our backs sore, laughing about how long it would take before we ever saw them grow tall. We used to joke that we were planting shade for a future we might not even live to see. Those trees grew anyway. They grew through storms and dry seasons and years of change. They stood there quietly, doing exactly what they were meant to do, even when everything else felt uncertain. After my husband passed, the land became more than a home. It became my anchor. When the world felt too big and too fast, it held me still. When loneliness crept in at night, I reminded myself that I was surrounded by something familiar, something that knew me. I promised myself, standing alone on that ground, that I would never leave it. I promised myself that no matter what happened, this place would always be mine. But promises, I learned that day, mean very little when the people around you decide you no longer need to be included. That promise meant nothing to the people who smiled at me every day while signing papers behind my back. The same people who hugged me, who asked if I was eating well, who told me not to worry about anything. The same people who sat at my table and drank my coffee and listened to my stories as if they still mattered. I thought about all the little moments I had missed, all the chances I had given them to tell me the truth. I thought about how trust doesn't usually break with a loud sound. It breaks quietly, the way this did, slipping through your fingers before you realize you're holding nothing at all. And as I sat there on the edge of my bed, the phone still warm in my hand, I understood something that would stay with me forever. The deepest wounds aren't always the ones that make you cry. Sometimes they are the ones that leave you dry-eyed, smiling politely, while your whole world rearranges itself without asking your permission. That was the day I found out. Not from my family. Not from love. But from a stranger who didn't even know my name beyond what was written on a file. And in that moment, before anger, before confrontation, before anything else, I felt a quiet, heavy truth settle into my bones. I was about to lose much more than land. I wasn't always afraid of losing things. There was a time when loss felt like something that happened to other people, something you heard about in stories or on the news, not something that would quietly walk into your life and sit down beside you. Back then, I believed that if you worked hard, loved deeply, and stayed honest, the important parts of your life would stay where they belonged. There was a time when I believed family meant safety. Not just love, but protection. The kind that doesn't need locks or explanations. The kind where you can close your eyes at night and rest easy, knowing the people closest to you would never be the ones to hurt you. That belief lived deep inside me for a long time. It shaped the way I spoke, the way I trusted, the way I handed pieces of my life over without fear. My husband and I bought that land when we were young and tired but hopeful. We didn't have much money, and we didn't pretend we did. What we had instead was energy and a shared dream that felt bigger than our doubts. The land wasn't impressive when we first saw it. Just a stretch of dirt under a wide sky, uneven and stubborn, like it was testing us before letting us claim it. But we stood there together, imagining things that didn't exist yet, and somehow that was enough. We worked on it little by little, on weekends, after long days, with sore backs and aching hands. There were times when we argued about it, when one of us felt it was too much work or not worth the trouble. But even in those moments, we never questioned why we were doing it. We were building something that belonged to us, something no one else could take away. Over time, that land became home. Not the kind you see in magazines, not fancy, not perfect, just honest. The kind of place where things didn't always match, where repairs were made slowly, where beauty came from use rather than decoration. The walls learned our voices. The ground learned our footsteps. Every season left its mark, and we welcomed each one like an old friend. When the children came along, the land seemed to grow with them. There was always room to run, room to fall, room to get back up again. Birthdays were celebrated outside whenever the weather allowed. Scraped knees were washed at the kitchen sink. Laughter echoed farther than the house itself. I didn't know it then, but those sounds were weaving themselves into the land, becoming part of it forever. Then life did what it always does. It changed. My husband passed sooner than I was ready for. There's no gentle way to say that. One day he was there, and then he was. The house felt too big and too quiet without him. Every corner reminded me of his presence, and sometimes that comforted me. Other times, it broke my heart all over again. After he was gone, the land became my anchor. It held me in place when everything else felt like it was drifting. I stayed, even when people suggested I move closer to town or find something smaller, something easier. I couldn't explain it properly, but leaving felt like another loss I wasn't strong enough to survive. My children grew up, they married, they built lives of their own. I watched them do it with pride, the kind that swells quietly in your chest when you realize you've done something right. They moved on as they should have, and I stayed. At first, they visited often. Cars in the driveway brought noise and movement back into the space. They brought their children, my grandchildren, who filled the land with new laughter, new energy. We sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the light change, talking about small things and big plans. They told me stories about their lives. I told them stories they had already heard, and they listened anyway. They promised me I'd never be alone. They said it easily, without thinking, the way people say things they assume will always be true. I held onto those words more tightly than I realized. I let them settle into my heart as facts, not hopes. I trusted them. Trust came naturally to me then. It didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a continuation of everything I had already given them. Time, love, sacrifice, care. Why would trust be any different? As the years passed, my body began to slow down in ways I couldn't ignore. Small things became harder. Big things took longer. I tried not to complain. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be seen as fragile. But they noticed. They always did. That's when they offered to help. It started gently. A suggestion here, a favor there. Then papers appeared. Forms, documents with long words and fine print. Just signatures, they said, smiling as they placed them in front of me. They told me it was to make things easier, to protect me, to make sure everything was taken care of if something happened. I remember feeling grateful, relieved, even. It felt good to think my children were looking out for me. It felt like proof that my belief in family hadn't been misplaced. I believed them because I wanted to. That's the part people don't like to admit. Sometimes we believe not because something makes sense, but because the alternative hurts too much. Questioning them would have meant questioning everything I thought I knew about my life, my role, and the people I loved most. Trusting your own children feels safer than questioning them. It feels natural. It feels right. And when you're tired, when your body doesn't move the way it used to, that feeling of safety can be comforting enough to quiet even the smallest doubts. I never imagined they would see my land as something to divide instead of something to protect. To me, it was a legacy, a shelter, a story still being written. To them, it slowly became a number, a resource, an opportunity. I never imagined my name could disappear from something I worked my whole life to keep. I never imagined that the same hands I once held when they were small would one day sign papers that pushed me to the side. Looking back now, I can see how easily love and trust can blur the lines between care and control. At the time, I only saw my family standing close, offering help, speaking softly. I didn't realize that sometimes the deepest losses don't come from strangers or sudden disasters. Sometimes they grow quietly in familiar places, fed by good intentions, unspoken assumptions, and trust given too freely. And all the while, I believed I was safe. The signs were there. Looking back now, they were everywhere, scattered through my days like quiet warnings I kept stepping over. I didn't trip because I didn't see them. I tripped because I chose not to. At the time, it felt easier to believe everything was fine than to sit with the slow, uncomfortable feeling that something wasn't right. It started with small changes, the kind you can easily explain away if you want to. Whispers in the kitchen that stopped the moment I walked in, voices dropping into silence as if someone had suddenly turned off a radio. At first, I thought it was nothing. People pause conversations all the time. Maybe they were talking about something private. Maybe they didn't want to bother me. That's what I told myself, and I let the moment pass. Phone calls began to happen outside. I would hear the back door open, feel a draft of air move through the house, and catch the low sound of a voice just beyond the walls. When I asked who they were talking to, the answer always came quickly, too quickly. Just work, or just a friend. The words felt rehearsed, but I pushed that thought away. Everyone deserves privacy, I reminded myself, even family. Conversations started to feel rushed. Questions were answered with half smiles and quick changes of subject. When I brought up the land, the future, or anything that hinted at plans beyond tomorrow, the room would suddenly feel tense. I noticed it, even if I pretended not to. The air would shift, and I would feel like I had said something wrong without knowing what it was. One day, I noticed a man walking slowly along the edge of my land. He carried papers and tools, stopping every few steps to look down, measure, and write. I watched him from the porch, my heart beating a little faster with each step he took. Curiosity turned into unease, and finally I asked my son about it. He smiled too quickly. The kind of smile that appears before the truth has time to catch up. He didn't look surprised or confused. He just shrugged and said, "Probably a mistake." That word stuck with me, probably. It floated in the air long after he said it, heavy with uncertainty. I wanted to press him to ask more, but I didn't. I nodded instead, trusting his confidence more than my own instincts. I told myself not to make a problem out of nothing. Another day, my daughter mentioned future plans while we were sitting together, folding laundry. She said the words lightly, as if they didn't carry much weight, but she didn't look at me when she said them. Her eyes stayed fixed on her hands, smoothing out wrinkles that didn't exist. I asked what she meant, trying to sound casual. She laughed softly and said, "Oh, just thinking ahead." The answer was vague, and the laugh didn't reach her eyes. My stomach tightened in that moment, a familiar feeling of discomfort that settled just beneath my ribs. I felt it clearly, unmistakably, but I swallowed it down. I told myself I was overthinking, that age makes you suspicious, that not every pause hides a secret. Because when you're a mother, you convince yourself that doubt is disloyal. You tell yourself that questioning your children is a failure of love. You remind yourself of all the times they held your hand, all the times they needed you, all the sacrifices you made willingly. You cling to the idea that love, once given, stays pure. So I told myself I was imagining things. I said it so often it became a habit. Every strange look, every hurried explanation, every closed door was brushed aside with the same excuse. I'm tired. I'm sensitive. I'm reading too much into it. Then the mail started going missing. At first, it was small things. A bill I was expecting did arrive. A letter I had been waiting for never showed up. I assumed it was the postal service, slow and unreliable as always. But then patterns began to form. Important mail disappeared while ordinary flyers and advertisements made it through just fine. One afternoon, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter that had already been opened. My name was on it, written clearly, unmistakably. I picked it up and felt a chill move through me. I hadn't opened it. I knew that. My hands hadn't touched that paper before. I asked about it gently, trying not to sound accusing. The answer came back quickly again. "Oh, I thought it was junk," someone said. Another shrug, another smile that didn't quite fit. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. I folded the letter carefully and placed it where it belonged. But something inside me had shifted. The ground beneath my trust began to feel less solid, even if I refused to admit it. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I was walking down the hallway when I heard voices coming from the living room. I wasn't trying to listen. I wasn't being sneaky. I just happened to be there at the wrong moment, or maybe the right one. Their voices were low but clear enough for me to catch the words that mattered. Once it's sold, she won't be able to do anything. The sentence hit me like a sudden cold wind. I stopped where I was, my body going completely still. For a second, I wondered if I had misunderstood. I hoped I had, but I knew I hadn't. My heart began to race, loud and heavy in my chest. I leaned against the wall to steady myself, my fingers pressing into the paint as if it could hold me up. They continued talking, their voices calm, practical, detached. They weren't whispering anymore. They were planning. That's when I realized they weren't talking about land. They were talking about me. About what I could do. About what I couldn't. About a future where my voice didn't matter because the decisions had already been made. In that moment, every small sign I had ignored lined up perfectly, forming a picture I could no longer deny. The whispers. The phone calls. The missing mail. The rushed conversations. It all made sense now, and the truth was heavier than I imagined. I didn't step into the room. I didn't confront them. I quietly turned around and walked back to my bedroom, my legs feeling weak beneath me. I closed the door and sat down, staring at the floor as my thoughts rushed in all at once. The most painful part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I had seen it coming and chose not to look. I had protected them from my doubts instead of protecting myself from their silence. That was the moment trust began to unravel, thread by thread, leaving me standing in the middle of a truth I could no longer ignore. I confronted them calmly. Even now, I'm not sure where that calm came from. Maybe it was shock settling into something steady. Maybe it was exhaustion after carrying doubt for so long. Or maybe it was the quiet understanding that once something breaks inside you, screaming won't put it back together. Whatever it was, my voice didn't shake when I asked them to sit down. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my tone. I just stood there, steady in a way I hadn't felt in years. That surprised them. I could see it on their faces. They were ready for tears, for anger, for panic. They were ready to comfort me or defend themselves. They were not ready for stillness. Stillness makes people nervous. Stillness leaves no place to hide. I asked one simple question. Why didn't you tell me? The words were soft, almost gentle, but they landed heavily in the room. I watched them fall into the space between us and sit there, waiting to be answered. Silence filled the room. Not the quiet kind, the heavy kind. The kind that presses against your ears and makes every second feel longer than it should. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, slow and steady, marking time like it always had, indifferent to the way everything was changing. No one spoke. There was no denial, no rush to explain, no sudden apology, just eyes avoiding mine, faces turning slightly away, hands fidgeting with nothing. In that silence, I understood more than any words could have told me. They hadn't planned to explain. They hadn't planned to confess. They had planned for me not to find out at all. When the truth finally spilled out, it didn't come wrapped in regret. It came wrapped in justification. One voice started, careful at first, choosing words like stepping around broken glass. Another joined in, firmer, as if rehearsed. Soon, the room was filled with reasons instead of remorse. They said I was old. They didn't say it cruelly, but that somehow made it worse. They said it like it was a fact, something obvious and unchangeable, like the weather, like time itself. They talked about my age as if it erased my ability to decide, as if the years I had lived had quietly disqualified me from having a say in my own life. They said I wouldn't understand. That one hurt more than I expected. I had spent my whole life understanding things for them, understanding their fears, their mistakes, their choices. I had understood sleepless nights and broken dreams and wrong turns. But suddenly, they believed I couldn't understand this. They said it was for the best. Those words echoed in my head, hollow and familiar. For the best. People say that when they want to soften something sharp, when they want to convince themselves that harm is kindness if you say it gently enough. For whose best, I wondered. They talked about convenience, about efficiency, about the future. They spoke as if they were discussing an object, not a life, a problem to be solved, a decision to be managed. As they talked, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not hatred, not even deep sadness, just clarity, clear and sharp, like a window being cleaned after years of dust. I saw them differently in that moment, and I saw myself differently too. They didn't see me as their mother anymore. They didn't see the woman who worked that land, who raised them, who stayed when things were hard. They didn't see the person who had built a life from nothing and held a family together with patience and love. They saw me as an obstacle to plans, an obstacle to progress, an obstacle that needed to be moved quietly, politely, without too much resistance. That realization settled into me slowly, like a weight finding its place. It hurt, but it also steadied me. Because once you know where you stand, you stop reaching for places that no longer exist. I didn't argue with them. I didn't try to convince them of my worth. I didn't remind them of sacrifices or memories. I simply listened. And when they finished speaking, I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. That night, after the house grew quiet and everyone retreated into their own rooms, I sat alone at the table. The same table where we had shared meals and laughter. The same table where trust had once lived. I turned on a small lamp and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside were old documents, papers folded and refolded until the creases had softened, copies they thought I'd forgotten, records I had kept not because I planned for betrayal, but because something in me had always believed in being careful. I spread them out slowly, reading each one like it was the first time. My name was there, my signature, dates that told a story no one else wanted me to read. I felt tired, but I also felt focused, clear-headed in a way I hadn't been in a long time. I made calls they didn't expect. I spoke to people who spoke plainly, without emotion, without family ties clouding the truth. I asked questions. I listened carefully. I took notes. Each conversation peeled back another layer of confusion, replacing it with understanding. With every answer, a small piece of my power returned to me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. I realized then that power doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like preparation. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting quietly at a table late at night, reclaiming what she was told she no longer needed. As the hours passed, I felt something unexpected rise in me. Not revenge, not bitterness, but resolve. A quiet promise to myself that no one would make decisions for me without my voice ever again. That was the moment everything broke. Not just trust, not just illusion, but the version of myself that believed love alone was enough to protect me. And in the breaking, something stronger began to form. The sale didn't go through. That sentence still feels strange to say out loud, even now. For weeks, I had lived with the quiet certainty that everything I loved was already gone, that the ground beneath my feet had been signed away with pens that never asked for my hand. I had prepared myself for loss in a way that was calm but heavy, like bracing for a storm you can see coming but can't stop. And then, slowly, the storm changed direction. The buyer backed out when the truth came out. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in careful steps, the way truth often does when it's been buried too long. Questions were asked. Documents were checked. Stories didn't line up the way they were supposed to. The confidence that had once filled their voices began to thin, replaced by hesitation and uncertainty. What had been wrapped in smiles and good intentions suddenly had to stand on its own, exposed to light it was never meant to see. Legal words replaced sweet lies. That was the moment I truly understood how fragile deception is. Once lawyers got involved, once everything had to be written clearly and explained plainly, the soft language disappeared. There were no more phrases like "for the best" or "making things easier." There were only facts, dates, names, and signatures. The truth doesn't care how gently you try to explain around it. It sits there, solid and unmovable, waiting for everyone to catch up. Suddenly, they were scared. I saw it in the way their voices changed, how they avoided eye contact not out of guilt, but fear. fear of consequences, fear of exposure, fear of losing control of a situation they thought they had carefully managed. It was strange to watch, realizing that the same people who had once decided my future without hesitation were now unsure of their own footing. Suddenly, they wanted to talk. They asked if we could sit down, if we could clear the air, if we could find a way to move forward together. The words sounded familiar, but they felt different this time. Less confident, less certain. I listened as they spoke, explaining themselves again, reshaping their reasons to fit the new reality. The tone had changed, but the center of the story was still the same. They apologized. Not because they truly understood what they had taken from me, but because they were caught. Because the plan hadn't worked. Because the silence they had relied on had broken open. I could hear it in the way they spoke, careful and measured, trying to repair something without fully touching the damage underneath. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct them. I let their words fill the space between us, and I paid attention to how I felt as I heard them. There was no satisfaction in their discomfort, no relief in their regret. Just a quiet awareness that this moment, like so many others, was more about me than them. I forgave. Not because they deserved it, not because it made what they did acceptable. I forgave because I was tired of carrying the weight of it all. I forgave for my own peace, not their comfort. Forgiveness, I learned, is not something you give away. It's something you claim when you're ready to stop letting pain decide how you breathe. But I didn't forget. Forgetting would have meant pretending nothing changed, and that wasn't true. Something fundamental had shifted, and it would never shift back. I could still love them, still care for them, still hope the best for them. But I would never again hand over my trust without thought, without protection, without my voice firmly present. Life slowly returned to its rhythm after that. Not the same rhythm as before, but a new one, quieter and more honest. The tension didn't disappear overnight. Some days felt awkward. Some conversations stayed shallow. But there was also space now, space where clarity lived, where boundaries existed without apology. Today, I still live on my land. The trees are taller now. Some of them have grown so high I can't wrap my arms around their trunks anymore. Their branches stretch wide, casting shade that moves slowly across the ground as the day passes. The porch creaks louder when I walk across it, each step announcing my presence the way it never used to. And I move slower. My body reminds me of time in small ways, stiff joints in the morning, careful steps in the evening. But I sleep better. I sleep with the kind of rest that comes from knowing where you stand, from knowing that what surrounds you is truly yours, not just on paper, but in spirit. At night, when the house settles and the land grows quiet, I no longer feel that tightness in my chest. I no longer replay conversations or question my instincts. I let the silence be what it is, not empty, not threatening, just peaceful. I sit on the porch some evenings and watch the sky change colors, the way I always have. The world looks the same, but I don't. I see things more clearly now. I hear what isn't being said. I trust myself in ways I didn't before. Because I learned something late in life that I wish I'd known sooner. Trust should never cost you your voice. If being quiet is the price of keeping peace, then that peace is already broken. Love should never erase your name. The moment your identity becomes inconvenient, something is deeply wrong. And silence is not the same as peace. Silence can hide harm just as easily as it can hide kindness. Sometimes, the truth hurts them harder than it ever hurt you. Sometimes, watching the consequences of their choices unfold is not about revenge or satisfaction, but balance. It's about the world correcting itself in small, necessary ways. It's about knowing that honesty, even when delayed, still has weight. And sometimes, that's enough. Enough to breathe easier. Enough to stand taller, even when you walk slower. Enough to know that what you built, what you loved, and who you are still matter. I didn't cry when I found out. But I smile now, not out of politeness or habit, but because I survived something that tried to erase me and failed.